Runbacks. We all know that it can be annoying if you have to run 60 seconds to get back to the boss. And we have all heard that DS2 has the longest runbacks. The clip in the background took about a minute to get back to the old Dragon Slayer from the first bonfire, which is not even the most optimal way to get back to him. Also note the NG plus red phantoms here do not respawn. I just let them live to show that getting hit during the fog wall animation rarely ever actually happens. So it took me 60 seconds to run back to the boss, so now, let us listen to how long Mauler claims this runback takes.
It takes 90 seconds for the old Dragon Slayer fight and the Duke's Dear Freya, but it gets so much worse.
It took me 64 seconds to get back to Freya, which is nearly exactly the same as Sith and DS1 had. I don't know how he got 90 seconds for them, but to me it just looks like he's trying to make the runbacks look worse than they actually are.
The longest bonfire to boss fog walls in Dark Souls 2 by the same measure I used for Artorias amounts to quite a little bit. But before we get to that one, let's look at ones that are similar to Artorias' 70 seconds. It takes 70 seconds to go from the bonfire to the boss fight with the Ancient Dragon and the Executioner's Chariot.
To get back to the chariot it took me 64 seconds from the first bonfire, which is roughly the same as it takes to get back to Quelag. Also note that the red phantom does not respawn unless you are an NG+. From the second bonfire it took me 58 seconds, which is roughly the same amount of time it takes to get back to the gargoyles. It took me 63 seconds to get back to the fog gate, which leads me to the question what specific time we are actually measuring. Is it the time to go through the fog gate or the time to get back to the boss? Because for some like Calamite it is a bit faster to get to the fog gate, but then it takes another 25 seconds to get to the boss.
It takes 80 seconds for the 3 bosses of the game and Sir Alonne.
Okay, 80 seconds is actually close to the 73 seconds it took me, but that is still 23 seconds faster than the 96 it takes to get back to Gwyn, which is an end boss that is a lot harder to beat, especially for new players that do not know about the parry cheese tactic yet. In this clip it took me 72 seconds even though I messed up several times during the run, but of course a slower PC might take longer on the loading screen. With a few mistakes Sir Alonne took roughly the same amount of time as Nito did.
Or a set of boss runs that have all ran over the length of Artorias' boss run and naturally may require you to attempt more than once. Talk about walking around for hours, right?
In this clip it took me 63 seconds to get back to Sir Alonne, which is about 10 seconds faster than what it took me to get back to Artorias, and more than 15 seconds faster than the 80 seconds Mauler mentioned.
Dark Souls 2, without a shadow of a doubt, has a staggeringly large amount of walking by comparison to Dark Souls 1, and this is by Harris's own definition of terms. These are some seriously long boss walks, and there's at least 10 of them.
You might have already been wondering why I've kept mentioning runbacks in DS1 that have a similar length. It is of course because Mauler claimed that DS2 has a larger amount of walking than DS1. One major difference is that several hard bosses in DS2 basically have no runback at all. Fume Knight and Manus are probably the deadliest bosses in their respective games. The Rain clip is played at normal speed, while Manus is played at 4 times the speed. Both games have some short and some long runbacks, but in DS1 the short runbacks are for bosses you probably beat on the first try. Well, except maybe you need a few tries for the Sanctuary Guardian. I really don't see how DS2 was significantly worse than DS1 was. The first boss in both games takes roughly the same time, and so does the second boss. Both Flexile Sentry and Gaping Dragon take about 44 seconds. Capra Demon is a few seconds shorter than the 48 seconds it takes to get back to the Magus and Congregation, but we all know that you are way more likely to die to the Capra Demon, especially the first time. Dragon Rider takes about the same amount of time as Ornstein and Smo, but again people rarely ever die to the Dragon Rider. But to be fair, more people die to the Lost Sinner than Priscilla, and they both take about 55 seconds. Lost Sinner a bit longer if you do not jump down like I did at the beginning. Belfry Gargoyles and Demon Fire Sage take both around 36 seconds. Old Iron King and Moonlight Butterfly take around 37 seconds. The Rotten, Mytha, Twin Dragon Riders and Elena combined take about as much time as it takes to get back to the bed of Chaos Fog Wall. And then you still need an additional 15 seconds to slide down to the boss. The run back to the Four Kings takes about as long as the Ruin Sentinels, Looking Glass Knight and Guardian Dragon combined. At around 2 minutes, Seth is the longest runback in Dark Souls 1, and it's about the same as Nachka, Demon of Song and Ava combined. For Ava, I even counted the time to get back to the boss and not just to the Fog Gate. This isn't a quite fair comparison as no one ever died to Pinwheel, but at around 40 seconds Pinwheel takes about as long as the Smelter Demon runback, but again I'm not sure if we have to count the 8 additional seconds it takes to jump into the arena. While we are at the only boss where I sometimes get hit while going through the Fog Gate, I also feel it is appropriate to point out that you do not get hit out of the Fog Gate animation if you have enough poise. And you do get invincibility frames halfway through the animation, and before that can always cancel the animation by rolling away. Also, there is a shortcut that feels fun to use and makes the run back a bit faster. But if you run across the bridge you will lure this last Alonne Knight further away from the Fog Gate. I only get hit during the animation when I use the shortcut or if I forget to lower both sides of the bridge. Do we count the 40 seconds it takes to get to the fog wall for Ceaseless Discharge, or also the additional 20 seconds it takes to get to him? Same for the Giant Lord. Do we count the 20 seconds to the fog wall, or also the additional 20 seconds to get to him? For Burnt Ivory King, is it the 24 seconds it takes to get to the fog wall, or the additional 8 seconds to fall down? Does fighting his army in the first phase count as part of the run back? Before we move on to the next chapter, here are a few more runbacks, because I want to show every single one from DS1 and DS2 in this video so that people can get an actual feeling for the time it takes. 55 seconds for the Iron Golem. A bit over 30 seconds for Covetous Demon, but I do not think that this one even comes up a lot. Velstadt takes 40 seconds and it takes 10 seconds longer to get to Vendrick.
But wait, what did I say was the longest one? There is, of course, the absolutely ridiculous requirements to be able to attempt Darklurker as a boss after losing to it. If you remove the fact that you have to battle PvP enemies, which is cancer enough, you have to sacrifice a human effigy every time, which is frankly ridiculous. But most importantly, the run from a bonfire to the fight is ridiculous compared to any other one in Dark Souls 1. Does it stop there? No, it does not.
The amount of time it takes for the Darklurker runback again depends on the definition. To me, fighting the NPCs always felt like the first phase of the fight, so I always considered the runback as just getting into the teleport. Similarly, does fighting Genichiro in the first phase of the Ishin fight in Sekiro count as part of the runback? To me, fighting never feels as boring as running, so to me these are okay.
However, the reason I'm mentioning it now is because he's complaining about all the time it takes to walk around in Dark Souls 1, which, excuse me sir, this seems a little bit hypocritical. What I am simply suggesting here is that there is nothing definitive about what amount of time should be spent walking, but removing the connectivity of your world has nothing to do with fixing this.
As we've seen throughout this video, there are a lot more short runbacks in DS2, especially for hard bosses. In DS1, many hard bosses have a runback that takes over 50 seconds. The runbacks in DS2 are shorter on average, with a few outliers that are about as bad as the average in DS1 and one real outlier which we will address at the end. But before we get to that, I would just like to point out that Mauler switched the topic to runbacks when H-Bomberguy complained that without teleport in the first half of DS1 he had to walk around a lot. And then he also inflated the amount of time it takes in DS2 to make his point seem more valid.
Harris ends this section with saying that the choice was made overall because it was designed by people who don't want to run around in circles for hours. This is a gross simplification of the intention behind allowing full warp between bonfires and ignores the simple satisfaction of walking through a connected world.
That satisfaction is subjective, and as H-Bomberguy states, it is his personal opinion that being able to warp around in DS2 from the beginning is more fun to him personally. I share that opinion. I prefer teleporting to merchants instead of having to walk several minutes to get to them, or just exploring multiple paths without having to worry about all the time it will take me to get back to the other one. But now let us move on to the elephant in the room, which you probably already see coming, as that area has a special design philosophy in common with the Iron Passage and Cave of the Dead, as all three of them are the optional co-op challenges of their respective DLC.
And maxed out every stat I needed with the benefit of being very experienced and accompanied by a summon to protect me, and the boss run itself, the boss run alone, took a staggering 5 minutes and 34 seconds to get to the fog wall from the bonfire. This is such a ridiculously long and terrible fight that most don't even bother trying.
Slowly fighting your way through is not a boss run. The run itself took me 2 minutes and 46 seconds, even though I messed up the direction a bit and got hit a few times. It is in fact the longest runback in the series, but it takes like half the amount of time he claimed it takes. But I would also argue that it is not even meant to be ran through, nor should this area even be attempted solo. Unlike the long runbacks for mandatory DS1 bosses like Gwyn, for Kings, and Seath, this one is deliberately meant to be completely optional, as Frigid Outskirts is the co-op challenge of this DLC. It is designed to be progressed as a group of high-level players.
One of the most difficult bosses to fight in the series alone, being that of the 2 Ava clones from the Ilium Lois DLC. You eventually have to fight them at once, and they have more health, can self-heal, and deal way more damage.
These co-op challenges were not designed for solo play. They have an increased summoning limit, grant special item drops during co-op, and allow you to summon players that do not even own the DLC. These areas all start with those statues that work as a summoning pool, as you can place your summon sign at the statues outside of the DLC and they will show up at the statues inside. I always feel like people unfairly judge those areas as being too hard, because they insist on doing them solo instead of accepting that they are meant as completely optional side challenges for people that enjoy jolly cooperation. Sure, you might get stomped as a solo player, but they deliberately do not have any interesting loot or new bosses you might miss out on. The layout of Iron Passage is designed all around co-op, as you were supposed to wait at the gate and let another member of your team pull the lever so that the team can progress both paths at the same time. Even Frigid Outskirts feels balanced if you just use the 3 NPC summons. You get the tankiest tank in the series, a ranged DPS and a cleric healer. To me, it is fun that there are areas where you can summon without having to feel bad about it.
because what he's said about Dark Souls 1 as a criticism is actually more applicable to Dark Souls 2, in that the game wastes huge amounts of your time. However, if you start talking about another product and how it does something worse when in fact it does it better, cracks are going to start to form.
In this video I've shown every single runback in DS1 and DS2, and I seriously don't see how the runbacks in DS2 are longer than those in DS1. On average, the runbacks in DS1 are longer, and there are more that fall into the category for long runbacks that he used. In DS2 there are a lot of short runbacks with only a few long ones. The longest one is the completely optional co-op challenge that is meant to be progressed with a group of high-level players, while DS1 has some very long runbacks for hard and or mandatory bosses. And Bomberguy was actually talking about long walks like the one I'm currently showing in the background. In DS1 Vamos, and with him Fire Infusions, were basically unused, because it takes so long to get to him, especially if you did not have the Firelink Shrine bonfire at the moment. Actually, I should say how long it took to get to him, because since Mahler made this video they fixed that in the remastered version, by placing a warpable bonfire here. So the developers themselves admitted that the game wasted huge amounts of your time by letting you run for several minutes to get to a blacksmith. And I also think that the difficulty of boss runbacks in DS2 is vastly overblown, as getting hit out of the fog gate rarely ever happens to me, and if it does it is only for the Red Smelter Demon runback, but not for any other bosses. I can do them all without having to fight anything, except for that one big bug on the way to the Demon of Song. What you are seeing right now is me doing the Sir Alonne runback without even running, even though it is often presented as a runback that is way too hard to run through. Without even running it took me the 80 seconds Mahler claims this runback took him, so all in all it seems to me as if he inflated the time it takes for runbacks in DS2 while downplaying the time in DS1, just to artificially make DS2 look worse.